It happened in a split second, so fast that most people would have missed it if they weren't paying close attention. During what seemed like a routine interview, Sam Heughan was answering a familiar question about his on-screen chemistry with Caitríona Balfe when something in his response shifted. The tone changed, his words came out slightly differently than expected, and for a brief moment, it felt like he had stepped outside the carefully controlled narrative he had maintained for years. And that single moment was all it took. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The setting was relaxed, the conversation flowed naturally, and both actors appeared comfortable, as they always do when discussing Outlander. Questions about their connection, their working relationship, and their ability to bring such a deep emotional bond to the screen have been asked countless times before. And Sam, known for handling these questions with ease, began answering in the same familiar way, until he didn't. Somewhere in the middle of his response, he used a phrase that immediately caught attention. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it stood out because it didn't quite fit the usual language he uses when describing Caitríona. There was a subtle shift, from speaking as an actor about a co-star, to something that sounded more personal, more instinctive. And almost as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, as if he realized it in the same moment and tried to move past it. What followed was even more telling. There was a brief pause, barely noticeable unless you slowed the clip down, where Sam seemed to hesitate. He adjusted his wording, smiled, and continued speaking, but the rhythm had changed. It was the kind of moment that might have gone unnoticed in real time, but on replay, it felt different. And that difference is what fans picked up on immediately. Within hours, the clip began circulating online, with viewers dissecting every second of the exchange. Some focused on the exact wording, others on his body language, the slight shift in posture, the quick glance away, the way he seemed to recover mid-sentence. It wasn't just about what he said, but how he said it. Because in moments like this, meaning often lives in the details. The more people watched, the more that one moment seemed to expand. Fans began comparing it to past interviews, noticing how carefully Sam has always maintained a certain boundary when speaking about Caitríona. He's always emphasized professionalism, respect, and friendship, never crossing into language that could be interpreted as anything more. And that's why this instance felt so different. It wasn't consistent with the pattern. Then came the reactions. Some fans were convinced they had just witnessed an unfiltered truth, something that slipped through before it could be controlled. They argued that moments like this don't happen randomly, that the way he spoke revealed something genuine beneath the surface. Others were more cautious, suggesting that it could simply be a misinterpretation, a natural variation in speech that was being overanalyzed because of who was speaking. But even among the skeptics, there was an acknowledgement that the moment felt unusual. Not definitive, not conclusive, but different enough to stand out. And in a space where every interaction between Sam and Caitríona is already closely observed, even the smallest deviation becomes significant. What makes this moment even more compelling is how quickly Sam seemed to correct course. He didn't stop speaking, didn't draw attention to it, but there was a clear shift back into familiar territory. The language became more structured again, more aligned with the narrative he has always maintained. And that transition, subtle as it was, only added to the sense that something had briefly slipped through. As the clip continued to gain attention, fans began asking the same question in different ways. Not just, what did he say? But, why did it sound different this time? Because when someone repeats a pattern consistently for years, even the smallest break in that pattern can feel meaningful. Now, that single moment has taken on a life of its own. It's no longer just a line in an interview, it's a point of focus, a detail that people return to, analyze, and interpret in countless ways. And whether it was truly accidental or simply perceived that way, it has opened the door to a new layer of speculation. Because sometimes, the most revealing things aren't the statements we prepare, but the ones we don't realize we've made until it's too late. As the clip continued to circulate, the conversation quickly evolved from curiosity into full-scale analysis. It wasn't just fans watching anymore, it became a collective effort to decode meaning from something that lasted only a few seconds. Frame by frame, tone by tone, people began comparing this moment to years of past interviews, searching for consistency, or the lack of it. And the more they looked, the more this particular slip seemed to stand apart. One of the strongest arguments came from those who believed this wasn't just a random variation in speech. They pointed out how carefully Sam has always navigated questions about Caitríona, often choosing his words with precision, keeping everything within a clearly defined boundary. That consistency made this moment feel less like coincidence and more like something that briefly bypassed that control. Not a confession, not a declaration, but a glimpse of something unfiltered. Others, however, pushed back against that interpretation, suggesting that the human element was being overlooked. After years of answering similar questions, it's natural for phrasing to shift, for responses to become more relaxed or less structured. In that view, what fans were seeing wasn't a hidden truth slipping out, but simply a moment of spontaneity being amplified beyond its original meaning. And in a space where perception often shapes reality, that distinction becomes difficult to maintain. But what keeps this moment alive isn't just the words, it's the reaction that followed. The pause, the adjustment, the subtle return to familiar language all suggest a level of awareness, whether conscious or instinctive. It's that transition that continues to draw attention, because it creates a before and after within a single response. And when that kind of shift happens, people naturally look for a reason. There's also the broader context to consider, one that has been building over years of public appearances. Sam and Caitríona have always shared a dynamic that feels unusually balanced, close enough to be believable, distant enough to remain undefined. That balance has allowed them to maintain both authenticity and privacy, but it has also created a space where any deviation becomes amplified. When expectations are so clearly established, even a slight change can feel significant. At the same time, it's important to recognize how much of this narrative is shaped by interpretation rather than confirmation. The moment itself doesn't provide a clear answer, it invites one. And in doing so, it reflects something larger about how audiences engage with public figures. People don't just watch what is said, they look for what might be implied, what might exist beneath the surface. And once that process begins, it rarely stops at a single conclusion. Some fans have started to see this not as a reveal, but as a reminder of how easily perception can shift. A single phrase, a slight pause, a moment of hesitation, and suddenly, years of established narrative are questioned. It shows how fragile the boundary can be, how quickly something controlled can feel uncertain. And in that uncertainty, multiple truths can exist at once, each one supported by different interpretations of the same moment. Meanwhile, Sam himself has remained consistent in one key aspect, his silence. No clarification, no correction, no acknowledgement of the attention the clip has received. That absence of response doesn't confirm anything, but it also doesn't close the conversation. Instead, it leaves the moment exactly where it began, open, unresolved, and subject to interpretation. And maybe that's why it continues to hold attention. Not because it definitively reveals something, but because it doesn't. It exists in that space where meaning is possible, but never fixed, where every viewer sees something slightly different depending on what they're looking for. Because in the end, the question isn't just whether Sam Heughan revealed the truth about Caitríona Balfe. It's whether that truth was ever meant to be spoken out loud, or if it only exists in the moments that slip through when no one is trying to reveal anything at all. Because in the end, the question isn't just whether Sam Heughan revealed the truth about Caitríona Balfe. It's whether that truth was ever meant to be spoken out loud, or if it only exists in the moments that slip through when no one is trying to reveal anything at all.